your semester's off to a good start. I'm enjoying getting to know you on the discussion board. This lesson provides an introduction to nature and environmental writing and highlights some key information from chapters 1 and 2 of our textbook, Prentice and Wilkins's Environmental and Nature Writing, a Writer's Guide and Anthology. This is probably the longest lecture of the semester, so if you need to pause and come back to it, feel free to do that. You can also refer to my lecture notes and the PowerPoint separately in the Week 2 folder. Chapter 1, The Trailhead, explains that the book is primarily designed to teach readers how to use the techniques of creative writing to turn our interactions with nature and environment into powerful stories. This semester, you'll have the opportunity to write, workshop, and revise a variety of kinds of nonfiction writing. Before we move into the next unit of the course, which focuses on craft, you'll learn about the history of nature and environmental writing and consider the characteristics of and distinctions between the two. And by the way, when I use the word craft, I'm talking about the techniques a writer uses. In Chapter 1, the authors mention David Gessner's Nature Writing by the Numbers, a comic you can find on page 189. Pause the video and take a look now if you'd like to. It's a tongue-in-cheek oversimplification, but it does playfully point out a common pattern, perhaps minus the throat clothes. You may observe in some nature and environmental writing. Why do patterns like this emerge? In part because people who write also read and may intentionally or unintentionally follow the models they observe. Repeated patterns also set up reader expectations for genre conventions. On the other hand, you'll also encounter examples that don't fit the pattern or that playfully interpret the conventions of nature and environmental writing. On page 9, the textbook lists traits that nature and environmental writing share. It speaks to the relationship between the natural world and human experience. It understands that the natural world is in flux and honors the dynamic relationship between the natural world and the human world. It makes ethical claims about the ways we live with the natural world. It's writing that provides readers with a sensory experience by employing evocative language and vivid description. And it is informed by a strong understanding of the natural history of a place or places. Let me say something about that term natural history before moving on. The blog of the Wheeler Lab and Lyman Entomological Museum explains that natural history is the story of nature, and so natural history is both that story and a practice of intentional, focused attentiveness and receptivity to the more than human world, guided by honesty and accuracy. This practice is guided by the questions, what is it? What does it do? To what is it connected? You'll see more about natural history, this time as a form of writing, on pages 19 and 20 in Chapter 2. As the authors note, natural histories remain a vital form of nature writing. In addition to natural histories and the various forms of narratives covered in Chapter 2, you might also come across the term environmental history this semester. And I mentioned one of my favorite works of environmental history in my introduction back in Week 1. Jack Davis's The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea. The author is a professor of history who specializes in environmental history and sustainability studies. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but with a purpose in mind. I've mentioned creative writing, science, and history in relation to nature and environmental writing. And there are even more disciplines from across the arts, sciences, social sciences, and humanities that contribute to our understanding of the the relationship between the natural world and human experience. I share this because I want you to know that whatever your major, you're welcome here, and your contributions will be valued this semester. Okay, back to definitions. Although there's overlap between nature writing and environmental writing, generally speaking, nature writing refers to writing that highlights the intricacy, beauty, danger, fear, and/or current conditions of the natural world. Environmental writing also often does that, but it is particularly concerned with how humans affect nature. I want to share another quote, and this one comes not from our textbook, but from an anthology of nature, environmental, and place-based writing titled Wild Branch. In the foreword to that collection, H. Emerson Blake gives us his take on writing about nature. Writing effectively and compellingly about nature requires many tools. It asks the writer to have an uncanny openness to the world. It expects the writer to grapple with extremely complex and disparate issues. It demands complete accuracy and a solid familiarity with science, even if the writer has no real scientific background. It needs to project urgency and resolve, but not so much that the writing becomes shrill or pious. It must deal with loss, but not to the point that the writing overwhelms the reader. And above all, it requires good writing and good storytelling. In short, the writer has to bring the world, its creatures, its places, its processes, and its mysteries alive. That's a tall order, to be sure, but you'll have the opportunity to practice those techniques and learn more about related topics and approaches this semester, all while being supported by a community of writers, your peers and me. With the foundational concepts and definitions from Chapter 1 in mind, let's turn to Chapter 2, A Short History of Nature and Environmental Writing. I want to point out a few key takeaways from this chapter. First, while we'll focus on English language, nature, and environmental writing from the U.S. this semester, as explained on page 17, you could make a strong argument that nature writing actually begins before the written word, with the creation stories and myths and tales of Aboriginal peoples across the globe. Other peoples and cultures around the globe have their own nature writing traditions. And the European-American story of exploration and settlement is far from the only story. Second, I don't know if any of you have studied the history of science or taken courses in science and technology studies, but the history of science is important because it was the scientific search for natural processes and relationships and our place within those processes and relationships that formed the foundation on which nature writing would be built. And it was that foundation, along with the work of various naturalists, that inspired 19th century writers like Thoreau. Third, those of you who are English majors will also recognize connections between nature and environmental writing and the British Romantic movement, whose writers reacted against the ravages of the Industrial Revolution. We can certainly see evidence of this tendency to turn to nature and away from technologies and associated problems in some modern nature writing. In contrast, environmental writing tends to address those problems more directly. Finally, you will encounter information about various narrative forms and cross-categories in Chapter 2, and this information will be useful to you as you read and write this semester. As I wrap up this overview, I want to look ahead and mention a critical lens and a mindset that will be important to this course. Since your textbook focuses on craft, it's a bit light on theory. Theory is important because it provides us with a critical lens through which to consider what we read and write. It also helps us understand key questions and debates in nature and environmental writing. For this reason, I'll integrate some attention to theory into my lessons going forward. One key critical lens is referred to as eco-criticism, which is an approach to exploring how nature is represented and valued in texts ranging from poetry and fiction to digital media. I'll talk more about this as we go along, but for now I recommend using these questions to read our course material and your writing group members' writing, or your own writing for that matter, through an eco-critical lens. How is nature represented in the text? What role does the environment play in the text? What values or beliefs about the environment are shown in the text? How are animals represented in this text? What is the relationship between the animals and the humans in the text? What is the relationship between the environment and the humans in the text? Where is the environment placed in importance compared to humans? And finally, how is nature empowered or oppressed in the text? And then finally, I invite you to approach that natural world and the course material with openness to surprise, flexibility of thought, curiosity, and lots of questions. I encourage you to keep a notebook or use voice to text if you prefer to record your observations and questions, especially when you find yourself out in nature or hearing about an environmental issue. Journaling will provide you with a rich storehouse of material to draw on as you write, so please try to make that a habit. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm so glad you're here.